January 27th, 2011, 12:34 a.m. Cairo. In data centers around the world, network engineers are watching their screens when something happens that has never happened before. A country disappears, not a website, not a server, not a city, a country. 80 million people gone from the internet in the space of about 20 minutes. One by one, the routes that connect Egypt to the rest of the world stop responding. The connections don't fail. They don't break. They are withdrawn, deliberately, cleanly, from the inside. By the time most of the world wakes up, Egypt is dark. No email, no websites, no social media, no way in, no way out. And the order to do it took one phone call. To understand what happened at 12:34 a.m., you have to understand the 2 weeks before it. In early 2011, a wave of protest was moving across the Arab world. In Tunisia, weeks of demonstrations had just forced a president of 23 years to flee the country. People across the region were watching, and they were organizing. In Egypt, the organizing was happening online. Facebook pages, Twitter hashtags, YouTube videos. A generation that had grown up connected was using the tools it knew to coordinate something the government had not seen coming. A protest was called for January 25th, a date deliberately chosen to fall on National Police Day. The protests were enormous. Tens of thousands of people filled Tahrir Square in the center of Cairo. And the whole world could watch it happen in real time, because the protesters were broadcasting it themselves. Photos, videos, live updates, streaming out of the country through the internet. The government tried blocking individual services first. Twitter went down on the 25th, Facebook on the 26th. It wasn't enough. People found workarounds, proxies, VPNs. The information kept flowing, so the government decided to stop trying to block the internet and to simply turn it off. Here's the thing most people don't understand about the internet. It feels like a cloud, something everywhere and nowhere, impossible to grab hold of. But underneath the abstraction, the internet is physical. It is cables and routers and buildings. And critically, in most countries, the connection to the global internet runs through a surprisingly small number of companies. These are the internet service providers, the ISPs. In Egypt in 2011, there were a handful that mattered: Link Egypt, Vodafone, Etisalat, and the big one, Telecom Egypt, the state-owned carrier that controlled the physical infrastructure almost everyone else depended on. Every one of these companies connected Egypt to the outside world using a protocol called BGP, Border Gateway Protocol. BGP is how networks announce themselves to each other. It's how a router in London knows that to reach an address in Cairo, it should send the traffic this way. For Egypt to be reachable, its ISPs had to constantly announce their routes to the rest of the world. We are here. This is how you reach us. Send the traffic through us. To disappear, they only had to stop. Withdraw the announcements. Stop telling the world how to find them. And within minutes, the routers of the entire planet would update their tables, remove the Egyptian routes, and have no idea how to deliver anything to 80 million people. You don't need to cut a cable. You don't need to destroy anything. You just stop raising your hand. It happened almost all at once. Network monitoring companies around the world keep constant watch on the global routing table, the master map of which networks are reachable and how. One of them, a company called Renesas, was watching Egypt that night. What they saw became one of the most famous graphs in the history of the internet. Starting at approximately 12:34 a.m. local time, the Egyptian routes began to vanish. Not gradually, in a cascade. Telecom Egypt withdrew first, then Link Egypt, then Vodafone, then Etisalat. One after another, in the space of minutes, each provider stopped announcing its routes to the world. around 3,500 individual network groups. The connections that made Egypt part of the global internet were withdrawn. By the time it was finished, roughly 88% of Egypt's networks were unreachable. Not damaged, not attacked, simply gone. As far as the rest of the internet was concerned, it was, at the time, the largest internet disconnection in history. An entire connected nation removed from the network by the coordinated action of the companies that connected it, acting, it was understood, on government orders. There was no law that clearly authorized it. There didn't need to be. When a government controls the infrastructure does what it's told. But one network stayed up. For several more days, in the middle of a total national blackout, a single Egyptian network remained connected to the outside world. It belonged to the Egyptian Stock Exchange. This is the detail that tells you everything about how the shutdown actually worked. It was not a single master switch. There was no big red button in a government building. The shutdown was executed provider by provider, network by network. And a few specific, economically critical connections were deliberately left running. The financial system needed to keep talking to the world. So it did. It's a small detail, but it reveals the truth of the entire event. This was not chaos. It was not a technical failure. It was a controlled, selective, deliberate operation, precise enough to disconnect 80 million people while keeping the stock exchange online. Somebody made decisions about what stayed and what went. The government's logic was simple. The protests were organized online. Cut the internet, and you cut the organizing. It did not work the way they expected. For one thing, the protests were already happening. The people were already in the streets. Removing the internet didn't remove them. It just removed their ability to coordinate, to share information, and crucially, to call for help or document what was happening to them. And it did something else the government hadn't anticipated. It enraged people who hadn't been involved yet. Cutting off an entire nation's communication, phones were targeted too, affected everyone. Businesses couldn't operate. Families couldn't reach each other. People who had been sitting at home now had a concrete, personal reason to be furious with the government. Some of them went into the streets specifically because of the blackout. The shutdown also drew global condemnation instantly. It became international front-page news, the government that switched off the internet. It was a vivid, almost cartoonishly authoritarian act, and it focused the world's attention on Egypt at exactly the moment the government least wanted scrutiny. And the information still got out. Activists used dial-up modems to connect through landlines to ISPs in other countries. Engineers outside Egypt set up workarounds. A few satellite phones fed footage to news networks. The blackout slowed the flow of information. It did not stop it. The internet stayed off for about 5 days. On February 2nd, the routes came back almost as suddenly as they had vanished. Renaissance watched the same graph run in reverse, Egyptian networks reappearing, route by route, provider by provider, until the country was reconnected to the world. The economic damage was already done. The OECD later estimated the shutdown cost Egypt's economy at least $90 million in direct losses, and likely far more when you account for the longer-term damage to industries that depended on connectivity and to Egypt's reputation as a place to do business. 5 days of darkness, $90 million. And it didn't save the government. On February 11th, 9 days after the internet came back, President Hosni Mubarak resigned after 30 years in power. The blackout is remembered as one of his final acts, and as one of the clearest demonstrations in history of a particular kind of power and its particular kind of limit. Quick pause. This is what Black Elsman covers every week. Real events, real systems, the infrastructure under your life and how fragile it actually is. If that's your thing, the subscribe button's right there. New case every week. Back to it. Egypt. 2011 was the moment the world learned a phrase, the internet kill switch. the idea that a government could, with sufficient control over its national infrastructure, simply remove its population from the global internet. It had been theorized before. Egypt made it real, on a national scale, for the entire world to see. And here is the uncomfortable part. Egypt was able to do it relatively easily because its internet connectivity was concentrated. A handful of ISPs, a state-controlled carrier holding the physical infrastructure, a small number of international connection points. When the number of choke points is small, the kill switch is easy. Different countries have different levels of concentration. Some are extremely centralized. 1 or 2 state-controlled providers, a small number of international cables. For those countries, an Egypt-style shutdown is technically straightforward. Others are highly decentralized, with thousands of independent networks and countless international connections where a complete shutdown would be far harder to coordinate. But harder is not the same as impossible. Since 2011, internet shutdowns have not become rarer. They have become more common. Organizations that track digital rights have documented hundreds of deliberate government-ordered internet shutdowns around the world in the years since, during elections, during protests, during exams, during unrest. India, Iran, Myanmar, Ethiopia, and many others have ordered partial or total shutdowns affecting millions of people at a time. Egypt was not the last country to switch off the internet. It was the first to show everyone else that it could be done. There's a deeper lesson buried in the Egypt blackout, and it's not really about Egypt. The internet was designed originally to be resilient. Its early architecture was built to survive damage, to route around broken connections, to keep functioning even if parts of it were destroyed. The dream was a network that no single point of failure could bring down. But that resilience depends on decentralization. It depends on there being many paths, many providers, many independent operators, so that no single actor controls the flow. Over time, in many places, the internet has become more concentrated, not less. A handful of providers, a small number of physical cables, central points where traffic is aggregated and where, if someone controls that point, they control the flow. The Egypt blackout worked because the architecture allowed it to work. The choke points existed. Someone simply decided to use them. The technology that connects 80 million people is the same technology that can disconnect them. The cables that carry information can be made to carry nothing. And the difference between those two states, connected and dark, can come down to a small number of companies, a small number of routers, and a single decision. The Egyptian internet came back. The government that ordered it gone fell weeks later. In the long view, the blackout is remembered as a failure, an act of desperation that didn't work by a regime in its final days. But the precedent didn't fall with the government. The lesson Egypt taught wasn't that switching off the internet saves you. It clearly didn't. The lesson was simpler and more durable, that it can be done at all, that 80 million people can be removed from the connected world by the companies that connect them, that underneath the cloud there are cables and routers and choke points, and whoever controls those controls everything that flows through them. The internet feels like air, like something that's just there, always for everyone. For 5 days in 2011, 80 million people learned that it isn't. Somebody is always holding the switch. The only question is who.